Hello and welcome to the premiere of FanView Season 2. I'm Sarah, today joining you as cosplaying accidentally as Catwoman due to this one. Joining you today, new co-host, Aron. Hi Aron, how are you doing?
Good. I'm actually Dags. I've just regenerated.
That's fair enough. That explains quite a lot because I didn't get a memo and I'm just, who's this? Who this guy? So today we are going to be delving into the curse of the DC universe, or as I like to put it, why can't DC seem to make and consistently make good films? Why do they keep having all these issues? So we're starting off tonight. We are going to have a quick look at, as I think most of you would be aware, this weekend we had San Diego Comic-Con. Now, oh yes, this is Valkyrie. This is Valkyrie. She is not named for anything in DC. I'm sorry. So this weekend was San Diego Comic Con, and there were a lot of announcements over San Diego Comic Con. If we could just bring up the slides, I will get straight into it. So, straight up, this weekend at San Diego Comic Con, DC brought us two new trailers for previously announced films. We had the announced a new trailer for Black Adam and a fresh trailer for Shazam, the new Shazam 2. So that's very interesting. Now, the problem with that, though, is if you look at what Marvel announced over the weekend. So this was what Marvel announced. They announced so many films, absolutely so many. Now, DC was originally apparently meant to announce more, but it didn't happen. What are your thoughts on that, Aron?
Well, I don't know. I don't think you saw the Batman at the cinema, but at the beginning of the year when they showed that, they had a trailer, the year of DC, and 2022 was meant to be the year of DC. And that hasn't really happened because of a lot of different things. But I do think Marvel outplay and run rings around DC in the publicity dealing with fandom and also at events like this. What did you think of the whole weekend?
Look, I thought it was a fantastic weekend. We got lots of great things for lots of great franchises, but unfortunately, DC just keeps struggling. You know, we know that they've got a bunch of projects in the works. We know of at least two somewhat cursed films that they're working on. We know that they have been working on more things in the this Batman cinematic universe that they are currently working on. But yeah, they just had this very lackluster display, and it's just so disappointing because we know that they are capable of more. And yeah, we're going to get into a bit of that tonight and what we think is the problem. And we have a comment from Rico. Why can't think of why the DC films weren't pushed harder this DCC. Oh yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, the Flash is a bit of a contentious subject at the moment, isn't it? We don't know what's going to be happening there. Are they going to recast? Are they going to release it as it is? What do you think, Aron?
Do we think that DC might have been wanting to announce more things, but because the issues that are going on behind the scenes with the Flash and Flashpoint being sort of almost the reboot and where they springboard off for the DC universe, that they've had to scramble and just sort of get Black Adam and Shazam out, and the other things have all gone down like dominoes while they decide what they're going to do with the Ezra Miller issue.
Yeah, look, that absolutely is the case, and also with the bad publicity around Aquaman at the moment, it's just a very messy situation. It very much feels like there is a curse on DC movies because it really feels like they just haven't ever really been able to catch a break. They'll make a good film or a couple of good films, and then for some reason, often very hard to tell why, it'll just absolutely fall apart.
This isn't just an issue that's recent either. If we look at the whole DC history, right from their first couple of movies, they seem to be able to launch with very, very strong movies and very, very strong franchise openers, and the wheels fall off really fast.
It really does. It really does. Like, to me, one of the biggest issues I've always thought with DC films is honestly one of the biggest problems is Batman. And they've just got this Batman's got this incredible rich lore. And I feel like the issue comes whenever they try and bring anyone else into it. They can do Superman on his own. They can do Batman on his own. But once they try and, link it all together, they just haven't been able to hit that formula that somehow Marvel seems to have absolutely created a mint with.
Well, the thing also, you say the big issue is Batman. I think the big issue is also execs and the behind the scenes producers at Warner Brothers, particularly. Whenever they seem to get something that looks like it could be the golden goose, they try to sort of, I don't know, jumpstart it or go too fast or think they know better than the directors and the creatives, when really they should step back and see how it folds out. And that's something, when we look at tonight, we're going to see over and over again, where directors and writers have been undermined by the studio, and it's ruined the franchise.
Yeah. Look, how about we start at the very beginning? Let us bring back the slideshow, and we will start very, very start. So we start with Batman in 1966. So the film version of the very popular TV show, the incredibly camp TV show that we all know and love. What are your thoughts on this one, Aron?
Well, I grew up with it, and it's really hard to look at something with a critical eye when you're a child and watching it. But I do think if you were a Batman fan from watching the television series, there is no way this movie could fail for you. It is everything that was great about the TV series on the big screen, with a bigger budget, with all the villains, and quite a good storyline. I mean, it's not, you don't take going to be Einstein to understand it, but if you liked the TV series, you would go to this at the cinema and you wouldn't be unhappy by the product that you saw.
Absolutely. I unfortunately had a bad experience the first time I saw it, only a couple of years back at the Astor. Unfortunately, for completely unrelated reasons, I was in a bad mood that day. And so everyone thought that I didn't like the movie because I just came out cranky. And I'm like, no, I'm just in a bad mood. It's nothing to do with the film. But yeah, it's camp fun. It's fantastic.
I envy you because I haven't seen this movie at the cinema, and it would be a great one to see at the cinema in all its Technicolor glory, I think.
Hopefully they do more screenings again. Hopefully those Astor-style cinemas realize that we all need more Batman. Now, moving on, after that came, of course, the very, very popular Christopher Reeve Superman movies, Superman 1 and 2. What are your thoughts on these ones?
Do you know much about the production and the behind the scenes of the making of Superman and Superman 2?
I've heard of the Superman curse, but yes. I don't know a lot about it other than that.
Well, Superman 1 and 2 were basically filmed at the same time, and there was a lot of production problems when they started, and they didn't know what the tone was going to be, and they didn't know who was going to write it or who was going to be in it and what they were going to settle on for the story. And eventually they wrote the scripts, and they were probably pretty close to what they filmed for the original Superman, but there was a falling out midway through the production with the Salkins, who were putting up the money, and Richard Donner, who was the director. So they basically concentrated on getting Superman 1 finished, and even though they had filmed most of Superman 2, they basically scrapped his version and got David Lester to come in and to refilm it, and they wanted more comedy, which Richard Donner didn't want, and they lightened it, and it was still a good movie because I think the bones were already there and they couldn't change it too much, but it also meant that they changed the direction it was going in. They offended the original cast because a lot of the cast wouldn't come back and work for a new director, because the deal in Hollywood is to get a full director's credit, you have to have filmed 51% of the movie. So even though there was maybe only 10% that they needed to finish, they went back and filmed 50, like enough to make it 51% to get Richard Donner's name off it and all those kind of behind the scenes things. This is where I think the curse of DC originally started, because those two movies are classics and you can still watch them today. And even though they're set in the 70s and 80s, they still hold up very well. When you get to Superman 3, which is the way the producers wanted to go, that's when the wheels really start to fall off.
Yes, so Superman 3, not so popular with the fans, and of course the Supergirl movie that came the year after. It really does seem like the biggest issue we keep seeing again and again is just producers coming in and meddling when they really just need to trust the creatives they've hired to make a good film.
Well, I'm a little bit older than you. Did you grow up with these ones? Do you remember seeing them and enjoying them when you were young, or did you kind of miss that?
No, my first Superman experience on the big screen was Superman Returns, the very incredibly popular one, which actually I happened to be in Sydney with my family when they were filming. So, and they had shut down several streets that we wanted to go to. So that's my early experiences with Superman.
Even as a 10-year-old, I remember seeing Superman 3 at the cinema and sitting there for a while and going, why is this movie about Richard Pryor and not about Superman? And it was one of those things where someone thought it was a great idea to use it as a vehicle for Richard Pryor as a comedy movie. And it is one of those things with the DC movies, and you would probably have seen this, where they have a hit which is pretty serious and dark, and then with each subsequent movie, they lighten it and put more jokes in it till you get to the point where it's a joke movie, and people who originally loved it because it was a serious action adventure movie leave the franchise because it doesn't appeal to them anymore. And it offends the fans who grew up with the comics and love the serious version.
I think that it's something that any comic book movie does have to balance. There's the natural campness of being a comic book movie, especially one set using source material, that early comic book source material. There's always going to be a campness to that era. And I think that that's something that a lot of movies struggle with. They struggle with finding that balance of campy and cool. And that's something comic books have always, honestly, they've done pretty well. And it's just something the genre does very well because it's on the page. It's there in front of you. But when it gets translated to films, sometimes they just can't make it work.
Well, the other thing is comic books aren't always as camp as they make it out to be. It's not the funny books. It's actually serious action adventures, and maybe Batman 66 has something to do with everyone perceiving that Batman is campy and funny, where a lot of the time it actually isn't. And I think a lot of the executives who go, what's missing from this? I remember watching Batman as a kid. It's not funny. There's no biffs and pals anymore, where they maybe haven't looked into the comics as much and see that some of the comics are quite brutal and quite serious and deal with very heavy themes.
Using a much more modern example, there's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, where the original comics, they're very dark and gritty. They're very serious. And then suddenly we have this children's TV show where they're radical, dude. And it's just a complete different tone shift. And then you see in the later media that they are kind of struggling with those two versions of the source material.
Yes. So I think that happens again and again. And then sometimes they overcompensate, where everyone says, oh, it's too light and it's too funny. And they go, okay, DC is the dark characters, which works absolutely fine with Batman, but not all of DC is dark. So when you try and do that with Wonder Woman and Superman as well, you suddenly don't get the version that everyone knows and loves from the comics and the TV series and things like that.
Yeah. With Supergirl, where did all the magic stuff develop from? Asks Gavin. I'm not quite sure about that. Aron.
What happened? They had the idea to do Supergirl, and it was originally going to be a Superman Supergirl movie. Then she got her own movie, and they basically dumped anything from the comic books, and they gave it to a writer who hadn't read the comic books and just did their own thing and thought it would be fun to have magic and all of that kind of stuff in it. And it really had nothing to do with the comic books at all. So they produced a movie which was Supergirl by name and had the costume and some of the elements, but just a totally original script. And this is another thing I think they make a big mistake in with comic book movies, where they have literally 100 years of stories and great stories and stories fans acknowledge are better than others. And they often hire scriptwriters who decide, I'm just going to use the characters, but I'm just going to make up my own mythology and start from scratch. And we all know how pleasing to a fan base that is when they hear that's happened.
I feel like it's this misguided attempt to invite new fans in without alienating anyone. But the problem is they then alienate the existing fan base. So they're trying to say, oh, you don't need any pre-existing knowledge to come in to view this because it's something new and exciting. But instead they just get rid of anything that made it good in the first place. And then it's just a generic action movie.
Yes. Well, the next slide we've got coming up goes the other way, where you don't have someone who doesn't know anything about Superman. You tempt the lead back by saying he can have creative control. And I've got to say, with the Quest for Peace, Superman 4, it was a good idea where you have Christopher Reeve going, well, I want to reflect today's issues. And the biggest issue is during the 80s was the Cold War. And I remember as a kid thinking one of the best things in Superman ever was when Superman marches into the UN and says, do you know what? I live on Earth too, and you won't do anything about the nuclear weapons. So I'm going to do something that no one else can, and I'm going to get rid of them. And I think that is actually a great base for a Superman movie. It's just they sold the rights to Golem and Globus, who are not renowned for having big budgets or good movies. So what was probably a movie that would have cost at the time $80 million, I think they got $30 million for it as the budget got whittled down and whittled down and whittled down. And then you see that on the screen, and even the titles, which were a big spectacle for the original Superman with the John Williams music and the fantastic opening titles, suddenly looks like, you know, a television movie CG sort of titles, which is not, no, the quality is just lost from the start.
Yeah, no, it's just not the same. And unfortunately, it was for a little while there the death knell of Superman on the big screen. But after that, we have a movie that I, until putting this together, I did not know existed. So tell us, Aaron, about the return of Swamp Thing.
Well, they did Swamp Thing and Return of the Swamp Thing, and both of them I didn't really realize when I saw them at the time were based on DC characters. Just for everyone, I'm not a big comic book reader. I'm more of a movie fan. So my into the DC universe is through the movies, not through reading the comic books. So I remember seeing these growing up. They don't get repeated and they don't get talked about much. They are just fun comic book movies. They're not anything outstanding, but they're not bad either. They're sort of more, you know, a good rent from the video library and an enjoying watch, but sort of mostly forgotten about.
They look like good pulpy fun, and I feel like I need to track them down and have a look at them because I always love a good pulpy rump.
Yes.
So on to the next slide, which is arguably two of the best comic book movies of all time, depending on who you ask. We have Batman 89 and, of course, Batman Returns. So do you remember when these ones came out, Aaron?
Absolutely, and there was a lot of excitement over these, but before they came out, much like all movies these days, there was a huge letter writing campaign and huge complaints about Michael Keaton, who was known as a comedy actor and from Mr. Mum and not from serious roles, being Batman. There's turned up online recently the photocopied petitions that you could send to Warner Brothers explaining why he's a great actor, but he's not ever going to be any good as Batman. I mercifully at the time, I was just a fan and I went and saw them and I didn't know all that was happening in the background. But they are both brilliant movies, and probably you're right, they're sort of the high bar of Superman of superhero movies. Probably Batman and Batman Returns and Superman 1 and 2 are my favorite DC movies.
So we've got some comments from Rod, who is the co-host of Toys on Trial and also my partner. We have the Burton films and lots of heart eyes. And from Michael Brywood, the other co-host of Toys on Trial, we have Batman Returns. No wonder I got into black PVC as a youth. Between that and The Matrix in the Y2K era, you had no chance. So yeah, look, those films, they were just fantastic because they weren't what people expected, but they really did pull the source material in that new direction. Sorry, not the source material, the films in the new direction, a little bit closer to the source material, though interestingly, there's a lot of things about it that are very much not comic accurate. Like, I believe from memory, Batman has no issue using guns and in that particular film, and also there's just a few things here and there that just don't quite line up with the comics.
Yes, the Joker is more the I guess the gangster version of the Joker than the clown prince of crime kind of version. So I, at the time, was never too much into the backstory of everything. They changed it, so basically it's the first version where the Joker kills Batman's parents as well. I actually like that. I don't think that's a bad change, though.
I don't mind it. I feel like whoever killed Batman's parents, as long as they die in that alleyway and the pearls fly across the ground, that's all that really matters. And as
I
long as, of course, young Bruce sees it and is scarred for life.
Yes.
Now, moving on to the next set of films, we have the very incredibly popular, campy favorites, Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. Aaron, what went wrong?
Oh, it's hard, isn't it? I remember seeing Batman Forever and not hating it. I thought it had its, one leg in each camp. They tried to do the dark Tim Burton, but they tried to do the camp and lighten it up as well. It was still a dark movie. It's still a moody movie. It has issues. A lot of people cannot stand Jim Carrey as the Joker. The Riddler. Some people love him. The Two-Face is disappointing because I think Tommy Lee Jones is a good actor, but he does seem like a watered-down version of Jack Nicholson's Joker. It wasn't a horrible movie, but the trouble with this, and I think it's the trouble with a lot of movies from my point of view, maybe not all fans, but from my view, the 20% of this movie that I didn't like, the studios loved, and they decide that's what the direction for the next movie should be. And you see this again and again, not with just DC. You see it in Transformers, where the first movie is pretty serious, and then it gets progressively funnier and sillier. And I would even argue the last Thor movie, they said Thor Ragnarok worked and made much more than the first two. It must be because everybody loves the jokes. So let's make a movie all about the jokes. So it isn't a failing that just DC have, but DC tend to make the same mistake over and over again.
I feel like they make it much more fatally somehow. Also, I feel like you've got to also remember that the difference between these early DC movies and the Marvel movies is Marvel just seem to be throwing everything at the wall and hoping that something sticks. Like, we have had a couple of failures in there, but they just keep going. They just keep going. Whereas, unfortunately, DC, they tend to have one box office failure and everything just stops. And then so there's no time for it to come back around and really improve and prove itself to us. So leaving a lot of people that do like the potentially less popular films very disappointed. So these movies, these Batman ones, these were actually very much in my childhood. I remember these being everywhere. I remember a boy coming to my grade 5 school social formal dance thing dressed in a Riddler costume, and it was very, very traumatic for all of us because it was just the spandex, and he really should have been wearing a dance belt, but unfortunately obviously his mum didn't think of that. So that's very much my era.
The other thing with these two movies is by this time they were well aware that a lot of the money made from the movies comes from the merchandising, and Tim Burton had issues because his movies were too scary and too adult for kids, and he was going to come back for Batman Forever, but was basically worked out himself. They really didn't want him because they wanted something that was more toyetic and would sell more Happy Meals. And you can see the transformation between Batman Forever, which was a lot lighter and more kiddie friendly, to Batman and Robin, where they actually brought in Kenner to design the vehicles because they wanted ones that would be good toys as well. And that is really undercutting the creatives at the studio when you've got the toy company coming in and saying, well, let's have these ice skate scenes because we want to do the Batmobile on skates and stuff like that. So that's the wrong way to approach making a movie, I think.
I also feel like with movies that are a little bit older, so pre-CG essentially, that's one thing that you really get is the toyeticness needs to be established from the word go. And that means nowadays you see a lot of the time studios are interfering with final cuts and with digital versions. So they might be changing a costume in post-production, adding a critter in post-production, things like that. So they know they can sell things, but they're not really interfering with the director's vision at the start. Whereas back then they really did have to be there in person saying, hey, no, that's not going to sell. We need to change it to this. And I can imagine for any creative, that would be an absolute nightmare to work with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think you see the two different versions of that with, we'll talk about this later with the Snyderverse, where you've got a director, David Ayer, who toe the line with Suicide Squad and say, yep, they've cut it and it's fantastic. And Snyder, who goes, they've cut it and now it's an abomination. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, so now we're on to a few more movies. Now, these two I've never seen. So Steel, I did again, one I didn't know existed, and until today. And Catwoman, I remember, but I remember hearing it was terrible and not to bother. What were your thoughts on these ones, Aaron?
When I saw Steel when it comes out, I don't remember anything about it until I put these slides together. I forgot that it was even made. It was obviously a vehicle for Shark, and Catwoman, has such a bad reputation. I did catch it on TV recently, and it wasn't as it's one of those things. It wasn't as bad as I remember, but it's a bad Catwoman movie because probably the story they dealt with is an interesting comic book story. And this is the other big issue that does my head in with, again, a lot of superhero movies. Why can't they let a bad character, a baddie, stay bad? Why do they always have to redeem them? Harley Quinn is bad. Why is she, good? Why do they always do this? Catwoman, I guess, is one of those conflicted characters. But if you were going, name your favorite Batman villains, you're going to say Catwoman. She's recognized as a villain. And they've done this thing with Catwoman in the recent Batman where they flipped that around and made her more help Batman or fall for Batman or be on the good side rather than a villain. So I don't know if you've seen that. That happens in a lot of franchises. Whenever something gets so popular, they then have to change them to a good guy. People can love not anti-heroes. People can love villains.
Well, yeah, and absolutely, that's something we saw with, say, jumping right ahead to Joker. We saw that is a film where the character is not redeemable in any way, but people still love that version of the character, and they really enjoy trying to sympathize with an unsympathetic lead. And I think it's one of those things where studios aren't giving credit to the viewer. They're not they're just saying, oh no, they have to, they have to have a redeeming things or we won't like them. The first Thor movie, Loki was very much making bad choices. And yeah, he had a sad backstory, but everyone knew he was a bad guy and doing terrible things. And people still fell in love with that character. Same with Avengers. That character then developed a cult following. So it's not one of those things where studios have to do this. So it's something they're absolutely choosing to. And it is very much them just talking down to the audience, unfortunately.
It is. And also it erases most of the good villains from franchises.
Absolutely. So unless they are just absolutely comically evil, it feels like they're not allowed to be evil at all. Rico has said she's closer to Robin Hood than Al Capone in the comics. And yeah, no, she absolutely is. But they do want to change her up and make her even nicer than she is in the comics, in the movies. So we then move on to very, very popular, once again, Batman coming in and saving the day, or Warner Brothers having success with 2 movies and then changing this formula. So we have Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, very critically acclaimed films. What are your thoughts, Aaron?
My first thought is I've stuffed up the slides because they didn't both come out in the same year there. But this is obviously when DC's decided we need to reboot and start again, because this was not continuing Batman as we had seen it before in the cinema in any version. And they obviously wanted to give someone control and create a trilogy of movies, not just one movie. So when you have the Nolan version of Batman, it grounds it in a reality that I don't think we've seen before. There are villains that work in this, like the Joker and like the Scarecrow, and there are villains I don't think would work. I don't think you could put some of the more outrageous villains like maybe Poison Ivy and things like that, just because they've tried to do it where it's realistic. And I think this actually adds to the amount of people who can go and see it, because you can be a comic book fan, but if you enjoy a serious crime movie, you can go and see it and it isn't too outrageous.
Yeah, so Rico's pointed out that those two are very similar to Batman Year One and The Long Halloween. So they're the closest to the comic book sources that really any of the DC movies have done up until that point. And look, it is that thing where people loved these movies. People went crazy for them. They were so popular commercially and both commercially and critically. They did this thing which a lot of films had been struggling with, especially comic book films up until then. They went, what if this happened in our world? What if it was obeying all the rules of our world? You get injured, you're likely going to die. things happen, and it really is it's just gritty. It's gritty in a way that doesn't feel like it's just for gritty's sake. It feels like it's this is, you know, it's a criticism of our world in a slightly comic booky way, and I think that's why it was so incredibly popular.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it isn't. This isn't my description, but it's true. It's like the level of crime drama, like Heat or one of those movies, but it's set in the Batman universe with Gotham and the cops and things like that. So yeah, I think this is one of the more successful adaptations of the Batman franchise.
Yes, and I would agree with that. Now, jumping ahead to movies that I also didn't realize came out this close to the Nolan films, Superman Returns in 2006 and Constantine. So I don't remember, I didn't see Constantine, but I do remember Returns coming out. What were your thoughts on these ones, Aaron?
Well, I loved Constantine. It came out, I saw it at the cinema. It was a really good sort of supernatural thriller. Not being a huge DC fan, I did not realize he was a big part of the DC universe and in many of the different titles and sort of has gone through. I thought it was a good standalone movie. Didn't think it was bad. Wasn't absolutely amazing either. The one that was a big disappointment to me, though, was Superman Returns, because I love, as I've said, Superman and Superman 2. And then after that, there was a few dud movies. And Bryan Singer, who had much success with doing versions of the X-Men, had been tempted across to DC to reboot Superman. And all through the production of this, he said it was going to be a love letter to the first two movies and it was going to follow on from the first two movies. And, you know, it was really going to tie in. They had the John Williams music in it. I went to the cinema and I was blown away by the first 15 minutes and go, this is one of the best movies I've ever seen. And it's one of the few movies I remember midway through the movie when Superman stops the plane crash. People stood up in the cinema and cheered and clapped, and that does not happen in movies much.
No.
Unfortunately, that was the peak of the movie, and the next 2 hours were average. And it is, again, one of those sort of curses of the DC movies where maybe if you stray too far from what people like, people don't like it. But then if you slavishly retell a movie that already exists and there's nothing new about it, you go the other direction, because basically it turned into Superman 1, where you've got Lex Luthor doing a land deal. And you're like, well, we've seen this all before. And then they did the extra thing that I think is a curse in any franchise, the son that he didn't know he had.
Yes, always dangerous.
You said you saw this when it came out originally. Did you love it, or did you like it, or what are your memories?
I really enjoyed it when it came out. I remember going to see it in cinemas, and having not seen the original Superman films, I thought it's fresh and new and so exciting. And then I remember not remembering, basically, as you said, after that him saving the plane. I don't really remember what happened after that. I remember for years kind of just being like, I loved the first half of the movie, and the second half, I don't really remember what happened, but I really enjoyed it. And it wasn't until years later actually seeing the original Superman movies that I realized just how much they'd really lent on them, and it really was very disappointing that they hadn't had the vision to do their own thing and really, you know, enjoy themselves and explore that universe in a more honest way, I guess. Especially back to back with Dark Knight, which completely different tonally, these two films. Yeah.
The other thing is Brandon Routh, who was, I think, a fantastic Superman, got totally stiffed on that, because they basically said if the movie made X amount of money, they would make a franchise out of it, and that was $200 million US, and it made about $198 million, and they kept it in the cinema for about a year till it sort of putted across that line, and then that brought a contract in that kept him tied to the Superman franchise for about another 7 years, and they didn't do anything. And one of the things they seem to do with Superman is cast an unknown, and then all the villains around him are more established actors. And I do think every single Superman casting has been inspired and great actors. And I think he was the one that missed out the most, because he could have had a great career as Superman and they didn't go any further. But because he was tied to Superman, he couldn't really do anything else either.
Yeah, look, I think especially for Ruth, it was very unfortunate, because he wasn't really known at the time. He was quite he was just a he wasn't really in anything beforehand. Whereas the other actors at least had some credits behind them, and so he really didn't get to do much more. Now I've just noticed the time. We really do need to move on. So we've got next, which was quite an unexpected move for DC, was Watchmen. So what were your thoughts on this one, Aaron?
Again, Watchmen is one of those all-time favorite comic books for a lot of people. I had never read it. I went and saw Watchmen and thought it was an absolutely amazing movie, and thought, why aren't the people making this actually making the more popular characters? I thought it was good. It was very adult. There's an extended cut, director's cut, like a lot of Snyder stuff that you can get, and I actually think probably the movie version is better than the director's cut in this case. It changes stuff from the original source material, and knowing the stuff they changed, I actually like what they did in the movie better. It kind of ties it all in more nicely. Did you enjoy Watchmen?
I did enjoy Watchmen. Now, I don't think I've actually seen the cinematic version. I've only seen the director's cut. I saw it not long after it came out, but a friend lent me the DVD. So yeah, look, unfortunately, I don't have any comments on the comparison between the two. But yeah, look, it's so close to that original source material, and it really was. In many ways, it's the birth of Zack Snyder's DC universe, because after that they thought they could give him the keys to the castle, and we'll comment on that in a second. So Watchmen, yeah, it was a much more adult movie as well, which a lot of other movies have struggled to really get that level of adult since, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. It probably was a audition piece for him taking over the DC universe. Maybe no one knew it at the time, but it wasn't even a hugely successful movie. It was moderately successful, but it was loved by fans. And I think that was the thing, when they saw that he got the tone right and fandom on side, that it was probably what they wanted to do with some of their bigger properties.
Yeah. All right. So then, does anyone know where you can get the director's cut? I think that it was available on Blu-ray. I'm not sure if there'd be anywhere else you could see it. I don't think they'd have it on streaming. Normally, they don't have director's
I don't know if that's the director's cut behind me, Colin, but you're welcome to borrow it. One of those two Watchmens is the
director's cut. I can see it. It says director's cut. Yeah, that's it.
Basically, the director's cut adds in all the pirate comic books type of stuff, and I think it just makes the movie go for too long and has less relevant stuff in it,
which Zack Snyder's never done before or since. So then moving on to the next movie was Jonah Hex. Now, all I remember about this was set photos of Megan Fox in a very tiny corset. What do you remember about this one?
That's funny, because I wish that was what I remembered, but I remember it as an interesting supernatural cowboy movie. Again, not the most amazing movie, not a movie I hated, a good rent from the video library, but not much more than that, really.
It didn't really get a lot of acclaim when it came out. I don't remember really anyone talking about it, other than, as I said, those set photos.
Yeah.
Moving on, then we have one of the most popular DC movies of all time, Green Lantern. Yay! What were your thoughts on Green Lantern?
This is an interesting movie. Green Lantern was a movie I really wish had succeeded. Green Lantern, for me, it was bogged down in a script that tried to fit too much mythology into the first movie, had villains that, weren't appealing to movie fans. Again, one of them is like your giant gas cloud at the end of the movie kind of thing. Interestingly, I didn't think Green Lantern and his girlfriend in it had much chemistry on screen, and he married her. So that's interesting. And also, it was hampered by CGI Green Lantern suit, and again, toy companies making them put sequences in. The most amazing thing about that is, though, when I was watching it, one of the scenes I remember I thought, this is fantastic, is when Green Lantern sort of defeats what's happening by making a giant car set and turning it into sort of a big. And I was told after they put that in because Matchbox had bought the Green Lantern franchise and they wanted to have a car scene in it. So one of the more creative scenes was actually inspired by the toy company going, "We've paid for this, you need to put Matchbox cars in it," kind of thing. So I was disappointed by Green Lantern.
Yeah, look, it was a disappointing film. It was incredibly long, and it was one of those films that you kept thinking, oh, so this is what the movie's going to be. Wait, why are they adding that? Wait, they keep adding more. Stop. That's enough. That's enough. That's too much.
Yeah.
Whereas if they just stopped a little bit sooner and maybe, thought about making it as two movies, because Green Lantern is a very deep lore, but it really was it was too much for a first film.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
it would be, yeah. It would
yeah,
be like, again, I can't help but make Marvel comparisons. I'm a Marvel fangirl. It would be like if the first Thor movie, did everything that the most recent Thor movie had done. It would just be way too much for
too
the
much.
average consumer, and they'd be
Yeah.
overwhelmed. So
Yes.
moving on to the next two was Dark Knight Rises and Man of Steel. Aaron, what
Well,
do you think?
I would say this is where we're getting into sort of the modern era of DC movies, where Dark Knight ushers out the last of the sort of movies before the DC expanded universe. We finished off the Nolan trilogy. Probably, I thought it was the second best out of them. A lot of people loved it. I thought it was a good movie, but after Heath Ledger, you can't really follow that, can you? That was nearly the perfect superhero movie. Man of Steel is interesting because this is another movie I really, really wanted to go in and have that same experience as a kid of seeing Superman the movie. And I liked it, but I didn't love it. And this is the whole thing with the curse of the DC movie media, where they get almost there, but they don't kind of cross the line, and you don't walk out and go, that's a movie I want to go straight back in and see again. What did you think of them?
I really didn't like either of these movies. I saw both of them in cinemas. One was I saw Dark Knight Rises as a midnight screening, and Man of Steel I went and saw only a couple of days after release. And
Yeah.
both of them just were not for me. I wish I could say that they were. I remember people around me loving them. Dark Knight Rises, to me, it went against the rest of the Nolan movies, which were down to earth and grounded, and it, unfortunately, by bringing in these comic book elements, it absolutely threw it apart. It went from suddenly being this grounded, normal movie that just happens to have superheroes to, oh, comic book rules now apply. And unfortunately, that just it didn't mesh with the rest of the trilogy to me, and it really was a letdown. But Man of Steel, unfortunately, to me, the biggest letdown was, to me, that character didn't feel like Kal-El. It didn't feel like Superman. It felt like somebody else had been thrown in there. And I know it was meant to be an origin story, but it didn't feel like the origin of the Superman that we know and love. And once again, I think, unfortunately, this was a slight reaction to Marvel, who had recently had success with Captain America, the First Avenger. I think they were trying to not get too similar, because those characters have similar personalities, very different powers, but similar personalities. And I think they went too far in the opposite direction. They just course corrected too hard, and it just lost me.
Yeah, this is one of the big mistakes, I think, because you've had the Nolan trilogy, which was the darkest of the movies up until the point, doing so well. DC latched onto it, and you'll see a lot of fans still say DC is dark. DC is dark. Superman is not a dark character. One of the things that sort of annoys me when someone has the rights to a franchise, you pay a lot for that franchise because it's recognizable. So when the first thing they did was change him from a red and blue suit to a maroon and navy suit, why bother? You've paid all this money for the franchise, and then them saying, we did that because no one would believe that anyone would wear that other suit. Well, I still believe in the original 70s Superman. That's no issue at all to me. And you're absolutely right with the Captain America comparison, because DC came out and said we couldn't have Superman like he originally was, because in this day and age, like, such a Boy Scout character doesn't work. Marvel absolutely proved with Captain America that it does work, and you don't have to be ashamed of being like Captain America, because Superman came first. You can accuse Captain America of copying Superman's popularity, you know?
And he absolutely did. Like, let's be real. There are quite a lot of those early characters are basically, they're just piggybacking off each other, and a lot of them share writers. So, it's one of those things where you can look at the two and see the comparison, and you should see the comparison because it's quite intentional. Both were, propaganda tools during the war. They were, yay America. Americana was at its all-time highest because they had so much, sadness going on around them, and they needed that hero that little children could look up to. And it really just became that symbol of law going forward. Moving on, because we're running low on time, we have Batman versus Superman, the first of the big attempted DCEU as we know it today. What are your thoughts?
Well, this is where I think the wheels really fell off, because if DC was smart, that very first slide you showed of the Phase 5 and Phase 6 is what DC should have been doing, where they have, by the end of Man of Steel, Superman wasn't Superman till the very end. They should have had a Superman lone movie. They should have, if they weren't getting if they weren't getting, sorry, I've forgotten his name, Batman from the Nolan movies.
Affleck. No, not
No,
Affleck.
no, no, no. From he was just
American
Gore.
Psycho. American Psycho.
Yes, we all know who we're talking about. Christian Bale.
Christian Bale.
If they had got him back, you could have done Batman versus Superman where it was. Because they didn't get him back, I don't think it was a smart move introducing Batman in a Superman movie. And the other thing is, it was originally a Superman movie, Superman, Batman versus Superman, but apparently the studio execs were seeing it and liking the Batman role better. So they were saying, put more Batman in. It's not a Superman movie now, it's Batman versus Superman. And this is where the wheels fall off. They should have said to Snyder, what's your plan? We will support you. You know, if you have 2 dud movies, 3 strikes, you're out. But just because you have one movie, we're not going to wobble on it. We'll support you. And this is where Marvel have worked, because some of those early Marvel movies weren't massively popular. The Incredible Hulk and Iron Man 2 wasn't as well received as the original ones. Superman Man of Steel wasn't hated. It wasn't the perfect movie, and it was, I think a lot of fans thought it was a good thing to build on. But DC decided they wanted to do Avengers without doing all the build up to get to the Avengers. And they wanted to do it so much. Not only did they do it with Superman, they did it with the Suicide Squad. And the Suicide Squad is the other slide we're looking at there, where every one of those characters, not everyone, but all the main ones, could have had their own solo movie or been a villain in a movie before they were put in the Suicide Squad. And so confused is the Suicide Squad, they throw in mini origins of all the characters during the movie. Harley Quinn twice, they do 2 different origins for her, and then have the main villain, one of the people in the Suicide Squad, where the absolute logical thing to do was do it in reverse order, where the first one they fight something like the Suicide Squad and you see all their powers. Then in the second one, you have one of them go bad, so you know how bad that person is in their powers. So it really was DC trying to play catch up to Marvel, and it just didn't work.
Yeah, look, it was very much a reaction to Guardians of the Galaxy. If Batman versus Superman was a reaction to Marvel Cinematic Universe, then, you know, Suicide Squad was, people liked, there was lots of music in Guardians. People liked that. Let's try that. And I've heard from many people that what had happened there was the trailer came out and it did have, I think, Bohemian Rhapsody was over the trailer from memory.
Yes.
And people loved it. They thought, oh, this is exciting. And so they went to the director, who was a newer director and didn't have much power with the studio, and basically said, we're going to re-edit your movie to make it more like Guardians of the Galaxy, to make it lighter, more fun. And so you get this very strange movie that's basically 2 movies spliced together, the director's edit and the studio edit. And it doesn't work because it's just these 2 things just not coexisting. I'd be very interested in seeing a director's cut of that, because I'd love to see what the originally intended vision was there.
I don't know if we will ever see that. I know when they first released the first trailer, the director came out and said, don't expect this to be a Guardians of the Galaxy, because the trailer looks fun and stuff, but it's a lot darker. But so many people responded so well to the trailer, as you said. I don't know if you know this, they got the people, Trailer Park, who cut the trailer together to re-edit the movie. So it wasn't even a director, an editor that was part of the production. It was someone who had cut the trailer together. It was I would find that quite traumatic, to the point where one of the things that is known, where Harley Quinn is saved by the Joker, where she's pushed out of the plane, in the original cut, the Joker is actually abandoning her and pushing her back into danger. So when they've actually reversed the actual characterizations and stuff like that, of course you're going to have a mess of a movie. It did amazingly well. I actually enjoyed it, even though it was a mess, because I do think the characterizations and the actors carried it, but maybe not in Jared Leto, but the rest of it I find okay, easy to watch, but don't think about that movie, you know.
Yeah, don't think too hard. It'll hurt.
Yes.
So then moving on to we've got Justice League our 2017 film, and Wonder Woman. So these two did okay at box office. So Wonder Woman did very well at box office, and Justice League, I can't actually remember how Justice League did at box office. Aaron, do you remember?
It did okay, but poorly compared to what they thought it was going to be. So
Yeah.
it is one of those things where you put all those characters in a movie, it's going to do well no matter what. And it did well, but not go and see the movie 3 times, so it's a blockbuster well. It is one of those things, everyone knew when it came out that it was basically a Frankenstein cut down version with Snyder's issues behind the scenes. So you had Josh Whedon come in and rewrite it and cut it. I don't think, though, there was as many issues with the Snyder cut as the studio was saying there was, and I don't think it needed to be refilmed. I think they could have easily released it, and it would have probably cost less than making the Josh Whedon version. I do think by this time the studio had said, we need more color, we're freaking out because it's too dark, like this is serious. And I think that was the wrong decision, because love them or hate them, those movies had been set on a trajectory, and they needed to see it through. And I think people who loved the originals felt betrayed that suddenly it did this curveball and they put the saturation and the color up and put comedy into it. And people who didn't like it went and saw it and it was a bad movie anyway.
Yeah. Look, personally, I'm not a fan of Zack Snyder's vision for the DC universe. That's just my personal opinion. They're just not for me. No, nothing against anyone that loves them. But yeah, this movie really was just a mess. It didn't know what it was trying to be. It was trying to impress and please everyone, and by doing so, I don't really know many people that went and saw it and liked it. Everyone immediately wanted that director's cut, and it's bad when they're relying on the director's cut to enjoy the movie. They're not just enjoying it as it is. The
other thing you've got to remember, when that came out, everybody wanted the director's cut for years and years and years, kind of forgetting everyone didn't really love Batman versus Superman and didn't really love Man of Steel. So if you're relying on a director's cut to a franchise that already is a bit iffy with some people, I don't think getting the director's cut was going to fix it. Have you seen the director's cut?
No, I haven't seen the director's cut yet. So unfortunately, just because I'm not a fan of Snyder, I just knew that it wouldn't really be for me. So and it was very, very long. So I didn't really bother. But look, it's one of those things where if they had really just stuck to their guns, and it's hard to say this because it's a multi-million-dollar film. But if they had just stuck to their guns and made them in Snyder's vision, they would have that cult following. They would have that group of people that loved them and for the rest of time said they were the best comic book movies ever made. And they developed that lore through that.
Yes.
Just because people didn't like them in cinema at the start doesn't mean it's a failure of a movie. It just means it wasn't for everyone. But the people that it's for, it's really for them. And by meddling so much, they just made it so it doesn't even get that legacy. Now it's just these movies that the studio just couldn't keep their hands off.
Well, the other side of that is I loved Wonder Woman. I actually thought that was a really good origin movie. I thought that was a fantastic springboard for the Wonder Woman character. She was actually probably best in that movie than any of the other movies she's had cameos on. And then it fell curse of the DC where they go, the next one we're going to play for jokes and we're going to have her in the future and it's going to be Technicolor again. And I don't know why they would do that. And especially because that wasn't an executive decision. That was actually the director and writer of that, Patty Jenkins. And she said they had planned that all along. And that's kind of disappointing because I really, really wanted to love Wonder Woman 1984. And I thought it was rubbish.
The biggest issue you get with going from Wonder Woman in World War I to Wonder Woman in 84 is, what was she doing during World War II? Where was she? Because I feel like she could have helped. And if she wasn't, that's a bit concerning. And moving on, because we're really running out of time, we have the first Aquaman movie and Shazam. So two very different films for DC, much more popcorny, much more fun. What are your thoughts?
I think these are kind of the reaction from they're part of the Snyderverse, but they want to distance themselves, and they obviously realise that going darker, although popular with some people, wasn't going to impress kids as much. And I think this is probably the right direction to go if they wanted, a more age-friendly family kind of movies than Batman versus Superman and that kind of thing. You're absolutely right. They're both popcorn movies. I don't think either of them are super memorable. Neither of them are offensive in any way either. They have some great set pieces in both of them. There's nothing wrong with them. Both of them, neither of them are going to ever be my favorite comic book movies. Aquaman made a lot of money. I think I might be guessing this, the most out of any of the non-Batman, Superman superheroes. I think Aquaman did beat Wonder Woman, which I think Wonder Woman was a more deserving movie. And then Shazam, again, was a more kid-friendly movie. And the thing I have to say is you can't watch these movies through children's eyes. And I know my son has loved both of them, where he thought Batman versus Superman and Justice League were boring. So...
Yeah, absolutely. And look, they are very much movies for the family. They're movies for kids. They're colourful. They're bright. Aquaman had Ariel and I guess a surfer bro taking on the world, and that's a lot of fun for a lot of people. And then Shazam, it's literally the little boy's fantasy of becoming a superhero. And so, who's not going to love that? Who's not going to love that? And they were good movies, but unfortunately, not quite enough to right the ship. As Rod has just said, Shazam was the closest to Marvel that DC ever got. Very cynical, but true.
Talking of the sort of DC curse, Aquaman is, of course, now associated with Amber Heard, and that's probably overtaken any reputation the movie had for being a comic book movie. And the same with, we were going to talk about it earlier, but Justice League, Ezra Miller and The Flash, which has kind of put a spanner in the works for all the current timeline of releases for who knows how long.
Yeah, look, I don't know how they're ever going to write either of those ships with those two names attached, whether or not no matter what your thoughts are on either of the people that the drama's all about, it's very hard to get rid of that kind of negative press. And I'm not sure how they're going to do it. I have a feeling that's part of why San Diego Comic-Con, we didn't hear anything about either of those movies, because talking about them means they need to make a statement. And they don't want to make a statement. They just want to wait for it to die down.
And you know what? In some ways, I think it's better for studios just to stay out of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, look, in some ways, I think you're right as well. We're nearly out of time, so let's very quickly go through The Joker and Birds of Prey. So what were your thoughts on these?
Joker was fantastic. It's interesting, though, it's not part of the universe. It's like someone wanted to make a Joker movie, had an idea, what they wanted to do. The studio greenlit it. It got accolades and made more money than they ever thought it was going to make. And now there's going to be a sequel, which is a musical, which is something that I didn't believe would happen, but there you go. Birds of Prey is probably the result of Harley Quinn being so popular and all these other, I don't know if you remember, they had about 3 movies lined up, which was a Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn movie and other Harley Quinn stuff. And when everything kind of got cut down and condensed, all of them went into the one movie. So you had Birds of Prey with Harlequin, who I believe isn't in the Birds of Prey comic book at all. And they changed stuff up and managed to probably make a vehicle for Margot Robbie where it should have been about the Birds of Prey. She wasn't the Harley that everyone remembered from the Suicide Squad. It was a different sort of, it was close, but it was a different version. And I just remember sitting through it going, this is terrible.
Yeah. Now, sorry, I just realized we've got more than I thought we did. So quickly moving on to the next two, we've got Wonder Woman 84, which we've already touched on, and The Suicide Squad. So what are your thoughts on the fact that they rebooted Suicide Squad so soon after the first attempt?
Well, The Suicide Squad is probably my favorite DC movie for a long time, maybe out of the whole reboot, because didn't expect so much and it was absolutely fantastic. It was adult enough to be an adult movie, but there was enough in it that kids can watch it and think they're getting away with seeing something a bit naughty because it's too adult for them, but not too over the top. What did you think of them?
I enjoyed the Suicide Squad. Wasn't particularly a fan of 84. I wanted to like it, but as we've already discussed, it just missed the mark of the first one. And because we're about to run out of time, just quickly going on to The Batman, the most recent outing. And I just actually watched this last night for the first time and really loved it. Well, how about you?
I absolutely loved it too. The one criticism I would probably have is it was probably 20 minutes too long, and the last part almost seems like when they caught the Riddler, the studio goes, "Oh, we need a set piece though." So the last bit where they flood the city and all of that seems to me it's great and it's visual, but it could have stopped at the Riddler because that was his plan and they stopped it. But I thought it was, again, probably the best Batman movie for a long time.
Yeah, look, I'm looking forward to what comes after, and really crossing my fingers hard that DC Entertainment and Warner Brothers don't make a decision that goes on the traditional and historic path they previously have. Let's hope they don't ruin it for themselves. So I think we're running out of time. So thank you so much for joining us, everyone. We've had a great time chatting with you, and we will be back here at the same time next week for another episode of Fan View. Once again, thank you for joining us, and I hope you have a really good night. Bye, guys.
Thank you, and good night.